We've had a lot of slates this year in daily fantasy football where injuries weren't too bad, but unfortunately week 13 was very much not one of them. Key injuries to Tank Dell, Derek Carr, and the list goes on and on and on. We're going to break down the impact of those injuries here today on the podcast, letting you know what to think about those guys going forward in NFL DFS and their teammates especially. We'll take a look forward to week 14 salaries on FanDuel.com to get you ready for another week of NFL DFS. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, here to break down key takeaways from week 13 in the NFL and take a look forward, as mentioned, to week 14 and the salaries on the FanDuel main slate. We'll do all that here in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Every weekday, Tom Vecchio is breaking down NBA DFS with the daily ISO as the in-season tournament ramps up once again. You can find that right here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. We also got UFC podcasts via Austin Swain. Both the Daily ISO and the Heat Check are also over on FanDuel TV Plus. To watch FanDuel TV Plus, go to FanDuel.com/watch and log in with your FanDuel account, or go to the FanDuel TV Plus app on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Roku devices. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel.com and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only. $5 pregame money line wager required. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, or visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-gambler.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's dig in now to our headliner from week number 13, which, of course, is unfortunately the Tank Dell injury for the Texans. Reportedly, a broken fibula, which means he'll probably be missing the rest of this year. We've had a fun time talking about Tank all year, so that's a bummer, and it's obviously a downgrade for our guy, CJ Stroud, as well, to lose a key piece of this offense. But Nico Collins went nuts after Dell's injury here. He had 12 targets on only 26 targeted throws. He caught 9 of those for 191 yards and a touchdown. And 4 of those targets for Collins were deep. And he's been really efficient this year. If you boost the targets he gets, he has blow-up potential pretty much every week. And it also does make the other guys more viable here. Now, Robert Woods is splitting snaps with John Mechie III, so I'm not going to get to Woods, but Noah Brown played the full game. Brevin Jordan, 75% snap rates with Dalton Schultz out. So I think that both Brown and whichever tight end is healthy will be in play in the absence of Tank Dell going forward. They get the Jets next week. The Jets are very good against wide receivers because of how good their cornerbacks are. So that's going to temper my enthusiasm a bit around guys like Collins and Noah Brown, but we can still potentially get some good salaries here from the more role players here. Let's check on Collins first. I would say probably 8,000 is appropriate for him, accounting for the matchup. And he's 78, so maybe we still get to Collins despite that, but I tend to prefer my receivers in games with higher totals, and this one will have that total for the Texans versus Jets in week 14 is 35.5. I've probably got it a bit lower than that. Well, a bit higher, but got to account for the injuries first and the wind. But regardless, not the best spot for a wide receiver. Noah Brown should probably be about 65 or so, and he's 6,000. Okay. I could maybe get behind that for Noah Brown at $6,000, given he's been very efficient this year. He has gotten some downfield works. Very tough matchup, as mentioned, but potentially interest there. So maybe we're on Noah Brown at $6,000. And then I'll check both Schultz and Brevin Jordan just in case Schultz is back. I would say probably 63 for Dalton Schultz. And he's 6,000 if he plays, so that's not too bad. Brevin Jordan didn't earn a ton of targets in this game, but did play a lot of snaps, which we do want. I think he's a pretty good athlete, which I like at tight end. In this game, Jordan had just 4 targets, but he caught 3 of them for some pretty good yardage numbers. So I would say 5,000 for Brevin Jordan, and he's 5,000 on the button. So it is a tough matchup for the Texans next week against the Jets, and it does downgrade guys like Collins and Brown specifically, but I still think I wouldn't be that shocked if we got there just because salaries on those guys are pretty respectable. Won't be at Stroud next week because the matchup is tough, total's low, downgraded for Dell, but could see myself being on either Brown or potentially the tight ends there as well. A lot of other injuries to discuss here across week number 13. Let's start talking about the Titans. Derrick Henry left to be checked for a head injury and did not return. Tyjae Spears had a very good role without Derrick Henry. He had 16 carries and 6 targets. He had 4 to 10 red zone chances. This team is not good running the football typically, and they don't score a ton of points, and that's a downgrade for a running back, but Spears would likely be an every down guy if Henry can't go. They play in Miami on Monday night for the 2-game slate. We should see a ton of Spears targets in that game. So, looking at the single game slates there, looking at the 2-game slates, we're going to want to be on Spears. I don't think his salary will be too high from that perspective. There's some other value we'll talk about later on for that 2-game slate next Monday. But I think Spears will definitely be in that consideration just because he'll be getting targets. He'll be the lead guy. Even if it's not going to be the best setup for a running back, I still think we'll want to be on Spears because of the way he projects to get his work. DeAndre Swift got hit hard late for the Eagles and did not return. I don't know if it was a legitimate injury because the game was basically over by that point. So maybe he could have come back, but obviously it's important if Swift does miss time. Kenneth Gainwell led that team in snap rate at 54%. Just 2 carries and 6 targets though. I would bet that Rashad Penny would be active if Swift were to miss time. And Gainwell would do enough to keep Penny out of play. So he'll probably get red zone work, probably get a lot of passing game work. So I can't go to Penny, but I'm also not sure if I would be super into Gainwell either. I would love to avoid this backfield unless it's a fully healthy Swift. Now they play Sunday night against the Cowboys. So talking single game slate there, Gainwell obviously be the preferred guy. I think you're probably looking for a positive script. If you're assuming the Eagles win, maybe Penny's more in play there. But even then, it could be more so Boston Scott. They could just give Gainwell the every down work, stuff like that. So I'm going to be just muted on everyone who's not Gainwell, and even Gainwell, I'm not going to be overly enthusiastic for. If Swift winds up being okay, then that's fine. I can get behind him in a more neutral script, but I don't think there's a lot of juice in that backfield when you've got Hurts taking away all the tush push chances. So would need a bit firmer role to feel good about anyone there, even with the injury, potentially to DeAndre Swift. Derek Carr entered into concussion protocol, also suffered back and shoulder injuries. So he's got a lot of stuff going on. Jameis Winston closed out the game for the Saints. And we've actually seen a decent amount of Jameis in relief so far this year. He's at negative 0.1, passing net expected points per dropback. Again, that's numberFire's expected points metric. Typically around 0.1 is league average, positive 0.1. And Winston is at negative 0.1, whereas Carr is at 0.08. So it would likely still be a downgrade for this offense to have Winston in there versus Carr. I think the vibes around the team might be better if it's Winston. So I guess whatever that's worth might be better. But I'd also think we'd see a lot of Taysom Hill. Hill lined up at quarterback on 16 snaps Sunday, which was actually more than Winston, who did so 9 times. So if Carr misses time, I'd expect them to be super run heavy. I'd expect a lot of early down rushes, and I'd expect Taysom Hill to be heavily involved, even if Jameis does start this game. That also impacts Alvin Kamara, who had 14 carries and 8 targets for this game. Pretty nice return to him in a featured back role. They get Carolina next week. So even with Carr likely being out, they're still pretty heavily favored in that game right now. Spread for Saints versus Panthers is currently at 5.5 in favor of New Orleans, again, with Carr assumed out, basically. So I do want to check in on Taysom Hill's salary. This past week, he was $6,500 on FanDuel, and now got an injury to Derek Carr. We saw Hill play a lot of quarterback. I'm hoping he's still tight end eligible on FanDuel, and if he is, I would say his salary should probably be around like $7,300 for next week at tight end. And Taysom Hill's salary is $7,000 at tight end. So it doesn't feel fun to go at Taysom Hill in daily fantasy because, you know, he is what he is, but 7,000 at tight end, even on the slate next week where we got a lot of high salary quarterbacks and some good tight ends, I think we're going to want to be there. So Taysom Hill, 7,000, an appropriate salary given how much quarterback I'd expect him to play, even if Jameis does start in week number 14. Moving on to our next note here, that's Zach Charbonnet suffered a knee injury for the Seahawks and was unable to return on Thursday night. They were already without Kenneth Walker III in that game. Now, we don't really know what Walker's outlook is. He was doubtful for that Thursday night game, so he could return in week 14, but he has not practiced since his injury. If Walker does come back, he'd be in line for a lot of work. In his one game without Charbonnet this year, Walker had 26 carries and 3 targets on a 79% snap rate. So we'd be heavily in on Walker if Charbonnet were to miss time. If Walker can't come back, DJ Dallas would likely be the lead guy here. He played a 39% snap rate Thursday. Kenny McIntosh was active, but played just special teams for the Seahawks. They don't have anybody else in the practice squad. Now, they are on the road against the 49ers next week, so we have to keep that in mind. But I wouldn't still want to check Kenneth Walker III's salary just because that role was so good in the one game that Charbonnet missed. I would expect it to be around, I would say probably around 75 would be okay for Walker if there's no Charbonnet, considering the spread and stuff like that. If it were a different spread, like if it were a different setup, if they're like at home against the Rams, I would say probably like 83, but I'll say 75 for Walker in this specific game, and his salary is $6,500. Ooh. So if Charbonnet does not go, that's definitely low enough where I'd be into Kenneth Walker III. You know, there are definitely risks there. There are downsides for sure, but I think the salary accounts for that. So I definitely would not mind taking a swing at Walker should we get a matchup here where we have no Zach Charbonnet taking on the 49ers. Christian Watson went down late with a hamstring injury for the Packers. He had finally been breaking out, so pretty big bummer to see that for Christian Watson. Jordan Love was efficient when Watson was out earlier on this year, but it was a little bit fluky. You know, living off of big plays, the success rate is a bit lower, so I do think this would be a downgrade for Watson, for Love, if Watson misses time. If Love was playing pretty well or had good efficiency numbers back then and is playing better now than he was back then. Both Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed had a 21% target share in that time, and that was even with Luke Musgrave being healthy back then. Reed averaged 2 deep targets per game in that span as well, and he got a lot of work in the red zone. Tucker Kraft had 6 targets last night. He played almost every snap. So if Watson misses time, it is a downgrade for Jordan Love, that's for sure. But it does make Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, and Romeo Doubs all more interesting, especially Reed. He would specifically entice me. I mentioned before when talking about Tyjae Spears that there's more value on the Monday 2-game slate. It's Jaden Reed. I think that I haven't checked salaries for that slate yet because I haven't pulled that up. I'm not sure if it's actually up yet, but I do think that Reed would probably be pretty interesting for that 2-game slate. Looking at the game as they have against the Giants for that one on Monday Night Football. So Jaden Reed bump up, Jordan Love bump down. Some interest in Dobbs, some interest in Tucker Kraft depending on salary, but Reed to me is the main guy I would want to turn to there. Brian Robinson was ruled out with a hamstring injury for the Commanders. Antonio Gibson played a 56% snap rate. He had 10 carries and 5 targets, but Chris Rodriguez also had 5 carries and his snap rate was decent. Gibson would be the lead guy if Robinson were to miss time, but I do think that Rodriguez would get some looks. You know, they're basically out of the playoff hunt. Rodriguez is a young guy. Gibson's toward the end of his first contract. So I typically love lower salaried backs who get a lot of passing game work, but I'd be a bit more skittish with Gibson because of the threat of Rodriguez. They're on bye next week, so maybe Robinson is healthy and makes this all moot, but I'd want to proceed with caution with Gibson just because I do think there's a good shot they get Rodriguez involved to get a look at him towards the back half of the year. For the Steelers, Kenny Pickett left early with an ankle injury, did not return. Sounds like he will miss week 14 for sure. Mitchell Trubisky came on and he had decent efficiency numbers again. They were way behind for a lot of that, but it's not a huge surprise because we've seen, similar to Jameis Winston, we've seen a lot of Trubisky already this year. He's at 0.04 passing net expected points per dropback, whereas Pickett is at negative 0.05 over a much larger sample. I've said this before because we've had a lot of times where Pickett's gotten bagged up this year. I view them as being basically the same, so no real change for me on the two of them. They play Thursday against the Patriots. I'd be very okay with Trubisky for single game because I think he'll be fine relative to Pickett. So if you would use Pickett there, use Trubisky. I think that's where I wind up. No real downgrade for passing game pieces. Running back still the same. So for me at least, it's status quo, whether it's Pickett or Trubisky. And it sounds like it will be Trubisky on Thursday night. Same game, Ramondre Stevenson was ruled out in the first half with an ankle injury for the Patriots. Ezekiel Elliott was featured after that, in part because I don't think they had any other running backs active in that game. But Zeke was effective. He had 17 carries and 5 targets for 92 yards in scrimmage. We talked last week about how Stevenson was becoming somewhat viable for DFS because he was getting a lot of work. And I think Zeke would slot into a very good role and be the Lone Ranger here if Stevenson were to miss time. So it's a terrible offense that I want no part of, but Zeke will probably get a good amount of work for that Thursday single game slate. So I think Zeke's going to be a really good play there. I, again, have not checked salaries for that one, but I would not be shocked if Zeke is a really, really good option just because he's going to be the only guy. He gets some targets. He can get some goal line work. He hasn't looked awful this year relative to the rest of the offense. So I think we'll want to be there for both Zeke and Trubisky for that single game Thursday night slate. Amari Cooper was checked for a concussion and never returned for the Browns. It was Joe Flacco's debut. And Flacco, I thought was honestly better than I expected him to be. He averaged negative 0.07 passing net expected points per dropback, which is obviously very bad, but that's better than what the Browns quarterbacks have done this year, including Deshaun Watson. Flacco also funneled work to Elijah Moore. Moore had 12 total targets for 83 yards. 6 of those were deep. So Flacco went like old school, F it, Elijah Moore is down there somewhere mode, and it was fine. David Njoku had been getting fed, but just 6 targets there, tied with Cedric Wilson for second on the team. So Elijah Moore is at least on the radar. I don't love Flacco, but there is enough there if the volume is good. And if Amari Cooper can't play, I think the volume probably would be pretty good. So let's name that salary on Elijah Moore for next week. Again, Flacco has a rapport with him from the time of the Jets, throws it deep to him, doesn't really care too much. Slight upgrade for overall efficiency, a lot of deep targets. I'd say in a game with a total that is currently at 37.5, that's probably worth around $5,900 for Elijah Moore, and his salary is 62. So I'm receptive to that just because it's targets, a lot of targets for a low salary, but I just never really gotten into Elijah Moore all that much. I've had him in Dynasty for a while. I've been trying to get rid of him. So I don't know. Maybe I wind up there by the time we get into the salary scroll, but I think that's about appropriate. Maybe I'm lower on Moore than I should be, but if there's no Cooper, I might still wind up being there just because the target distribution could be so good. Finally, Tyler Higbee left late to be checked for a concussion for the Rams. We didn't see ripple effects of that in game because it happened pretty late, but it could further condense the target tree here, which is already very, very good. Puka Nacua got obliterated several times, but came back in. He's a tough dude, apparently. Played through some injuries, had a huge day on 7 targets. 4 of those targets were deep for Nacua, which is not always what happens for him. Cooper Kupp led with 8 targets, but the yardage was not there. And it really hasn't been for Kupp since his first 2 games. So I'm fine continuing to miss out on Kupp if he does, even if he does finally perk back up. But Nacua is getting bumped up, and so is Kyren Williams once again. Williams played 94% of the snaps with 21 carries and 5 targets. insane usage. He also had 10 out of 13 red zone chances, which means that he's at a 60% red zone share this year in the games he has played fully. For context, Christian McCaffrey is typically around like 54%, and like a good number for running back is 40%. Kyren is at 60%. I love it. Both Nacua and Williams have two of the best roles in the league, and those roles could get better if Tyler Higbee does miss time. They're at Baltimore next week. That's a really tough spot given how well Baltimore's defense has played. But honestly, with their roles, I wouldn't be shocked if I do still wind up liking them in that setup. I would say Kyren Williams should probably be considering matchup right around 85 again, which where he was this week. He's 88. That's fair. No pushback on that. I think that's an appropriate salary. For Nacua, I think he should be 8,000, honestly. Like, Matthew Stafford keeps being better than I think he's going to be. Nakua's getting work. He looks really good. So I'll go 8,000. He's 76. So I think I'll be on Nacua next week. Do you want to check Cup just out of curiosity? He's 71. That's not low enough for me yet. So it'll be Nacua as a guy I turn to next week. Feel pretty good about that one. And would not be shocked if he winds up being like a really solid bring back option for Baltimore stacks, which I would like to get to. And looking forward to seeing what their salaries look like for next week. That wraps up injuries. Let's dive in now to the role changes and role updates from week number 13. Let's begin things here by talking about Zach Moss, who flopped for DFS, but his role was superb for the Colts. He played 94% of the snaps. He had 9 out of 13 red zone chances. And because they've now faced the Titans twice, they are not facing them again, which is a blessing for Zach Moss, who has an amazing role, but has had the tough matchups there. Next week, Indianapolis is on the road taking on Cincinnati. They're actually 3-point favorites in that game as of right now. So that's a pretty good setup for Zach Moss and DFS. And honestly, with the role he's got, I know this may sound outrageous, but I think that Zach Moss should have a salary of $7,500 for next week against the Bengals. And next week, Zach Moss's salary is $6,800. So I know he did burn us this week, but honestly, you knew that could happen given the matchup. He's playing every snap, getting every red zone chance that he can get. He gets targets. He's really good. So Zach Moss, $6,800 will be a prime focal point next week. We're talking the week 14 main slate over on FanDuel.com. Let's move on to some other role changes from this past week, beginning with Devon Achane. Achane returned for the Dolphins and scored twice, but it's kind of hard to know what his true role was because of when he got his production and when he got his snaps. He lost a lot of work to Raheem Mostert in the first half of this game. Achane's snap rate in the first half was around 40%, but got some garbage time work, finished with a 59% snap rate. He had 17 carries, 4 targets, and 103 yards from scrimmage. So clearly, Achane is talented, and he got through that game without a re-injury. But Mostert is still the lead guy, or at least he was in that game. So it's difficult to know what to expect in the short term here. But I'm going to want to take swipes at Achane. They are on the 2-game slate Monday, taking on Tennessee. So a very tough rush defense. But Jeffrey Simmons left that game early for Tennessee. That could open up some holes for the Dolphins' run game. They don't have Kevin Byard anymore, which is why I was okay going to Moss as a value play this week. I'm going to be pretty tempted to go at Achane once again, just because he's so talented. I feel like it's hard to keep him off the field in spots like this. I know Tennessee's struggling, so they're 13-point favorites in that game, but I think I'll want to be on Achane just because even though the snaps came late, he was healthy, he looked good, so I think I'll want to be on Achane in that 2-game slate on Monday. Austin Eckler seemed to get a pretty big role reduction on Sunday. He played just 57% of the snaps. He'd been in the 70s in the 3 games before that. Actually, I think 80% in that game against Baltimore. Eckler finished with just 27 yards from scrimmage on 14 carries and 3 targets. He kind of just still doesn't seem right after that ankle injury. I'd need a pretty big discount to be super intrigued by him. Now, the problem is they're facing the Broncos next week, and that's not a terrible game for the slate. So I do at least want to check Eckler's salary next week. I really don't want to use him, so maybe I just shouldn't even look. Don't tempt myself. I think I need him to be around 7,000 to be enticed, and he's 75, so that's higher than I need it to be, which is a blessing. I'm hoping that's high enough where I can avoid him. Zach Moss 68, much better option to me than Eckler at 75 by a wide margin. So hopefully I can avoid Eckler because I really do think that he got a role reduction on Sunday, and I'd rather avoid that if at all possible. We did see a bit more work for Quentin Johnston, though. He had 7 targets in this game, which was a season high. 2 of those were deep. He had a really bad drop that should have been a long completion. So I don't think we need to start prioritizing him, but it's the best role he has had all year. It's at least something in a game we'll probably want to stack. So let's do the same thing with Johnston, at least check in on his salary. I would still want to be like low 5,000s, like maybe 5,500 or so. And he is 57. I think between Eckler and Johnston, I'd rather use Johnston. That might be egregious. Maybe that's very stupid, but like that's where I'm at with Eckler. I think more so than Johnston. So if you're getting exposure to that game, I think I'd rather do so via Johnston at 57 than Eckler at 75. Just my personal preference on that one. The Panthers were very run heavy in their first game without Frank Reich. They had a 44% early down first half pass rate. And they're at 53% before this game. That's against a Tampa Bay defense that is very good against the rush. Chuba Hubbard took advantage. He had 25 carries for 104 yards. He had 5 out of 7 red zone chances as well. So it was very clear that Hubbard was ahead of Miles Sanders once again. It's not a very good offense still, but that's a decent role, and they're going to try to run when they can. I think you can run to an extent against New Orleans. So they're on the road taking on New Orleans next week. That spread, again, is at 5.5. I would say Chuba Hubbard could probably tempt me if his salary were around like 66 or so, and he's 67. So that's not terrible, given the role that he had. He moved back ahead of Miles Sanders again. They were pretty run heavy. He looked okay in that game in a tough matchup. So I would not be surprised if Chuba Hubbard does wind up being a guy we turn to next week in DFS. Not a priority at that number, I don't think, relative to a guy like Zach Moss, but still someone I could at least be somewhat tempted by at that salary. Even with how rush heavy the Panthers were, we did see a career day for Jonathan Mingo. He had 10 targets and 3 deep targets, added a red zone target as well. Adam Thielen had 6 overall targets and hasn't had more than 75 yards since October 15th. So I'm fully off of Thielen right now. I don't really want to get to Mingo, but he's not totally off the map if you like the environment and the salary enough. So, you know, if you're stacking that game, which not sure you should, but like if you were stacking that game, you want to use Taysom Hill, want to have a cheap bring back, maybe that's Mingo, but arrow is up. Might not be enough to use him though. Devin Singletary's role dried up on Sunday for the Texans. I probably should have seen this coming. Used him more than I should have on Sunday. Snap rate fell to 44%. Damian Pierce led in carries 15-8. It's not a good rushing offense, so I'm not going to go here unless someone is featured on this team, and that's probably not going to happen right now. So for me at the Texans, all about the pass catchers for the time being. The Cardinals were in a positive script against the Steelers, and it led to a better role for James Conner. He played 76% of the snaps, finished with 25 carries and 2 targets, and he also had 8 out of 10 red zone chances. So if you think Arizona will be in a positive script, then Conner is viable. If not, he's a very easy fade. And because of the fragility of this offense and fragility of that role, if he's ever popular, I'd be out. But he can be in play if you think that Arizona wins. They're on bye next week, so they can get guys like Michael Wilson healthy, which would be a good thing for them. Marquise Brown got kind of banged up again. So good to get guys healthy, which could increase the odds they wind up being in a positive script. Finally, on Thursday, Jackson Smith-Njigba seemed to get a bit more work for the Seahawks. He had 11 targets on Thursday to lead the team. His previous high was 7, which brings his target share up to 17% in games that DK Metcalf has played. And as we discussed a few weeks ago, Smith-Njigba is getting more downfield looks now than he was before. So I'm okay with Smith-Njigba. I still don't adore him, but in the right pass-heavy scripts, he could be in play. Now, they get a pass-heavy script next week as they are taking on San Francisco. So maybe Jackson Smith-Njigba winds up being a value play. I would say a proper salary for Smith-Njigba right now is probably around $6,000 for that matchup. Maybe that's too low, but I think that's about right, given they have 2 other guys who can get passes. And they're facing a very tough defense. So let's say $6,000 for Jackson Smith-Njigba, and he is $5,500. Oh, okay. I can get behind that. So getting more work overall, earning trust downfield, seems to be getting more acclimated with the offense and a pass-heavy script. That could be enough to make Jackson Smith and Jigba a legitimate value play for week number 14 in DFS. So we'll check back on him on Thursday, but I think Jackson Smith and Jigba, potential value play at wide receiver in week 14. Let's open things up now and talk about other salaries on the week 14 main slate and do our salary scroll, trying to identify guys who may be a bit under salaried for the week 14 main slate over on FanDuel.com. Key games for the week 14 main slate. The big one is Kansas City versus Buffalo. I want to see what Pacheco's salary is. Not sure if Jerick McKinnon will play, but could have interest there. The Bills are great, so I adore them. Excited about that game overall. That's the key game. Other high total in the slate is the Niners and the Seahawks once again. 46.5 there, heavily slanted towards the 49ers. And then I think the Baltimore-LA game, the Ravens and Rams might be kind of fun too. Also have the Lions taking on the Bears in Chicago. So let's go to quarterback here and check out some salaries. See if we can find some guys who may be a bit under salaried. Lamar Jackson is $8,000. Yes. Sign me up for that. As we get that thing. All right. I would say Lamar at $8,000. That's going to be pretty tough to turn down in that matchup against the Ravens, given that it's a decently high total. The Ravens are favored in that game, so they're implied to be pretty good. Lamar has had bad touchdown luck, but I think he could have a big game here pretty soon. So Lamar Jackson, 8,000. I don't want to fill out a lineup right now, but I think there is a 98% chance that Lamar Jackson winds up being my head-to-head quarterback for week number 14. Scrolling down further at quarterback, not seeing a whole lot that draws me in, so probably no value plays we're turning to. Jameis is 66, but I think, again, with Taysom getting a lot of work, probably not going to be there. So, yeah, I think it's a Lamar week. Again, $8,000. It could wind up being where Gus Edwards plays 3 snaps and scores 3 touchdowns, but I'm going to take that risk. I think that Lamar is really, really fun at 8,000. Mahomes, 84. Josh Allen, 9,000. I think it'll be a week where we want to spend up a quarterback with one of those 3 guys. Running back, we have Christian McCaffrey, $10,500. Worth it. How can I push back on that? He deserves that. He's worth that. Very okay with McCaffrey at that number. Scrolling down further at running back, we do have Rachaad White in Atlanta at $7,400. They're pretty good against the rush. Atlanta is. White's role is just really solid, so wouldn't be shocked if I'm intrigued by him. Ooh, Bijan is $7,100. Tampa Bay is great against the rush, but Robinson gets a lot of work in the passing game. I'll want to dig back into their game against Tampa earlier on this year to see what Bijan did there, but his role is a lot better than what you should get out of a guy at 71. So really intrigued by Bijan at that number. Also, Isaiah Pacheco, 7,000. There's no McKinnon again. Pacheco's role, and when one of those guys is out, is really, really good. So I could honestly be intrigued by Pacheco even if McKinnon plays. But if McKinnon is out again, that could be a really good spot to go back to Pacheco at $7,000 to get low salary exposure to this game. Honestly, this range is just rules. So I'm lower on Rachaad White now, but Bijan 71, Pacheco at 7,000, Jahmyr Gibbs at 69. Didn't have a great role on Sunday. Didn't do a whole lot against the Saints, but it was still the same split as it had been previously. Gibbs snap rate 46%. 8 carries, 2 targets, still had 3 red zone chances though. And the Bears are pretty good against the rush. So maybe that encourages the Lions to throw a bit more. I don't hate Gibbs at 69, maybe a good pivot play. But then Zach Moss is the headliner at 68. So that lowers me on Hubbard, knowing we have Bijan 71, Pacheco 7,000 and Moss 68. But I think at running back next week, we're going to want to live in this range because that's a lot of really good guys in the low 7,000 range, high 6,000 range. Javonte Williams' role is pretty good again. He's $6,600 taking on the Chargers. The Chargers defense stinks. They've been better against the rush this year than they were last year, but they're still just, they're just a bad defense. Javonte in week number 13, I'm trying to find the Denver notes. Yeah, Javonte, 13 carries, 3 targets, 66% snap rates, only 1 out of 8 red zone chances, but they're pretty run heavy. I think Russ actually ran a lot in the red zone for them this week. So wouldn't be shocked if I get to Javonte at 66 in that matchup, given I might stack that game, but this range is just so good. at running back for next week. Scrolling down further, I mentioned Kenneth Walker III at 65. Interest in him goes down a bit given that we've got those other guys above him, but like still a good salary relative to his role despite the very tough matchup for him. Into the 6,000 range at running back. Wanted to see where Keaton Mitchell was. He's $5,900 coming out of their bye week, had a better role before their bye for the Ravens. For Baltimore last week, Mitchell, 9 carries, 2 targets, 89 yards, 46% snap rate. Roles seem to be increasing though. So Mitchell at 59 might be like a leap of faith, but you do want to be ahead of things when it comes to DFS. So I wouldn't be shocked if I get there for Mitchell. If we get like reporting that drives up his roster rate, then maybe I'd bump off because it's still a pretty flawed role, but like that's not bad. Down further at running back into the 5,000 range, don't see anything down here that stands out to me, but like it's a really good week to spend the mid range and lower at running back, I think. So that'll make it easier to get to Allen at 9,000, Mahomes 84, and Lamar at 8,000 as well. Moving over to wide receiver, should get Justin Jefferson back this week. His salary is $9,000 on the road against the Raiders. He's been practicing for a long time. You know, not the best quarterback play by any means, but big game for the Vikings. Does they have playoff hopes still? If we have the salary to get there, it's not like the best game for stacking, but it's also not the worst game on the slate. So Jefferson 9,000. Welcome back, Justin. Excited to talk more about him potentially on the week 14 preview show. Getting down further at wide receiver, trying to find some guys I feel really good about here. Do you like Puka Nacua still at $7,600 taking on the Ravens? That's a tough matchup for him, but as a bring back for Lamar, given the value we have at running back, I think that does work out pretty well. So do you like Nacua? Deebo Samuel 75. We have Brandon Ayuk at 77. I don't really like outside receivers against Seattle, given the talent they have at cornerback. So not as into Ayuk in those matchups. He did have the long touchdown on Thanksgiving against them, but I think it's more of a Deebo setup, which is annoying because Deebo just went off, so people will be on Deebo. But I think he's fine at 75. I want to see what Kittle is too, though, later on, because maybe he's a better way to attack that secondary right now. Scrolling down further at receiver, Courtland Sutton's role has been really good recently. He's 72. He's been getting more deep work recently. I think he had like 6 deep targets against the Texans. I don't know. It was a good role. They kept getting picked off, but he had a good role in that game. And the overall target share for Sutton have been pretty good. He's 24% overall, 40% deep. Yeah, 37% deep, but 5 deep targets for him on Sunday. So Sutton at 72 could be a way to get exposure to that game with the high total. Bumping down further, Gabe Davis, 68. It always depends on the cornerback quality. If he's facing bad corners, he's fine. If he's facing solid or okay corners, I can't get there, but it's a game we'll want to stack. So Gabe Davis, 68 is not terrible. Scrolling down further at receiver, Zay Flowers, 65. Fine with that. Doesn't have a lot of yardage, but gets good volume, gets creative touches. I could be okay with that. Rashee Rice is 63, had another good game. He led the Chiefs in targets on Sunday with 9. He has 10 and 9 targets now the past 2 games. So Rashee Rice, 63, that might be a good option. Between Rashee Rice and Zay Flowers at 63 and 65 respectively, I'd probably lean towards Rice because the spread is tighter in that game. The total is higher, but both are guys I really do not mind at their respective salaries. Again, Noah Brown, 6,000 could be in play despite the tough matchup with the Jets. Jerry Jeudy is $5,800 in that game against the Texans. Jeudy, only 4 targets, so not a great game, actually. 1 deep target for Jeudy, so probably not going there. Odell Beckham's 57. I want to see what the practice injury reports look like for him because when he's been on the field, he's gotten a lot of work this year. He's gotten like good target shares, gotten a good ADOT. He's been getting, I think, look better recently. He missed a lot of that Chargers game. I think he's just banged up with that shoulder still. So if we get full practices for Beckham this week for $5,700, helps offset the salary of Lamar, helps offset the salary of Nacua or potentially Kyron Williams. I think Beckham will be very in play at that salary for next week. We have JSN again at $5,500. Very on board with that when trying to find a bring back for any 49ers stuff, and then don't see anything else below him. So really do like Jackson Smith and Jigba 55. Really okay with Odell Beckham at 57 as well. Pretty into Rashee Rice at 63 and Zay Flowers 65. So similar to running back, we've got value at wide receiver, which makes me feel better about getting to the high salaried quarterbacks, getting to Justin Jefferson potentially, but then also getting to a high salary tight end. Travis Kelce is $8,000 taking on Buffalo. We've got Taysom Hill against Carolina at $7,000. Kittle 66. I've come a long way in George Kittle. I think that he's actually really, really fun, even when those guys are healthy. And I'd been pretty low on him for a while, but Kittle on Sunday, I think, had only 4 targets, but he did a lot with them, or 6 targets, I should say. 6 targets for Kittle, had 1 deep, I believe. No, he had 2 deep again. No, I didn't. No, they had no deep targets on Sunday. Sorry. So no deep targets for the 49ers at all on Sunday, but like, it's a really good week to spend down at running back and receiver, spend up at tight end for Kelce, Hill, or Kittle. I think that's the way things shape up on the week 14 main slate. If there's no Dawson Knox yet, not really sure what his outlook is, but Dalton Kincaid is $5,800. That's fine. Schultz, if he plays, is $6,000 as well, taking on the Jets. I think we're going to want to spend up. Isaiah likely is 52. He had 6 targets in that game before their bye week. He's played a lot of snaps with no Mark Andrews. So if you're spending down a tight end, I would say it's probably with likely over Brevin Jordan at $5,000. But overall, tight end's pretty good. So I think it's pretty clear with the way we want to play things in week 14. And if you're thinking about this slate, putting some thought into it, I would say think about the mid-salaried running backs, think about the value wide receivers, and we're going to want to get a lot of salary allocated towards quarterback and tight end for next week, at least based on the way things look right now. I think that's where we'll settle in. So pretty jazzed already about week 14 based on the potential value we've got available to us. That's all we got here for today for the Week 13 Recap Podcast. Already excited, though, about Thursday. Thursday's show will be live on the FanDuel YouTube page at 10 a.m. Eastern. You can also find it up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after the fact and on FanDuel TV Plus, as always. If you've got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sonnes. You can find me on Threads at Jim.Sonnes. You can find FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your single game slates for Monday nights, and we'll talk to you once again Thursday to get you ready for what should be a very fun Week 14 slate. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.